2 years before I finally retired, I was sitting in my office when a colleague asked me a simple question. When was the last time you laughed at work? I couldn't remember. Not just a polite chuckle, but real laughter. That's when I realized I was paying a price for staying in my job that went far beyond just delaying retirement. I was trading pieces of myself I could never get back. If you're working past 60 and wondering whether it's worth staying just a little longer for financial security or other reasons, what I learned about the hidden costs of those extra years might change how you think about the real value of time versus money. I'll share exactly what those 2 extra years cost me, how I finally recognized the signs I needed to leave, and why the decision to retire when I did became one of the most important choices of my life. The man who forgot how to laugh. That conversation with my colleague hit me harder than I expected because it forced me to acknowledge something I'd been avoiding. I'd been working at the same company for 15 years, and for the first decade, I genuinely enjoyed what I did. I looked forward to Monday mornings, felt energized by challenges, and came home excited to tell Linda, my wife, about interesting projects or conversations. But somewhere in those final few years, work had become something I endured rather than enjoyed. I was going through the motions, counting down hours until 5 p.m. and dreading Sunday evenings because they meant Monday was coming. The worst part? I'd convinced myself this was normal. Everyone feels this way in their 60s, I told myself. It's just part of getting older and being ready to retire. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted, and it wasn't just about aging. I was 63 and had always planned to retire at 65. Linda had already retired 2 years earlier and was loving her newfound freedom. Every evening, she'd share stories about her volunteer work, new friendships, or projects she was working on, while I had nothing to contribute except complaints about meetings that went nowhere and deadlines that felt increasingly meaningless. The health wake-up call I ignored. The first real sign that staying too long was costing me came during my annual physical. My doctor looked at my blood pressure readings and asked, "Has your stress level increased lately?" My numbers had gone from normal to borderline high in just 1 year. I brushed it off. "Just busy at work," I said. But the truth was more concerning. I'd started having trouble sleeping, waking up at 3 a.m. with my mind racing about work problems that, in daylight, I realized weren't really that important. I was drinking an extra glass of wine most nights, telling myself it helped me unwind, but really using it to shut off the anxiety that had become my constant companion. The physical symptoms were just the surface. What worried Linda more was how I'd changed emotionally. I'd become irritable over small things, pessimistic about situations that used to excite me, and increasingly withdrawn from friends and activities I'd previously enjoyed. "You're not yourself," Linda told me one evening after I'd snapped at her over something trivial. "When was the last time you seemed genuinely happy?" I couldn't answer that question either. Looking back, I realized my body and mind were sending me clear signals that it was time to go, but I was too stubborn, or too scared, to listen. The calendar that wasn't mine. One of the most eye-opening realizations came when I started paying attention to how little control I had over my daily life. My calendar was completely owned by other people's priorities, meetings I didn't want to attend, and deadlines for projects I no longer cared about. I calculated that less than 20% of my working hours were spent on things I found meaningful or engaging. The rest was bureaucracy, politics, and busy work that felt increasingly pointless as I got older and gained perspective on what actually mattered. But the calendar issue went deeper than just work hours. Because I was tired and stressed from my job, I had little energy left for the things that could have brought me joy. Weekends became about recovering from the work week rather than pursuing interests or spending quality time with Linda. I remember Linda suggesting we take a long weekend trip to visit our daughter, and my first thought was about which meetings I'd have to reschedule rather than excitement about seeing our family. That's when I realized work wasn't just taking my time. It was taking my ability to be present for the life happening around me. The relationship strain. The impact on my marriage was perhaps the most painful part of staying too long. Linda had embraced retirement beautifully. She'd developed new routines, made new friends through volunteering, and had found a sense of purpose and joy that I envied. Meanwhile, I was coming home each day drained and negative, unable to match her enthusiasm for life. Our conversations increasingly centered around my work complaints, rather than shared experiences or future plans. Linda later told me that during those final 2 years of my career, she often felt like she was living with a stranger. "You'd physically come home, but mentally and emotionally, you were still stuck at the office," she said. "Even on weekends, you seemed preoccupied and distant." The worst part was that I was using work as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own transition anxiety. It was easier to complain about my job than to face my fears about retirement. But this avoidance was creating distance between us precisely when we should have been planning and dreaming about our future together. I realized that staying in a job that was draining me wasn't just affecting my own well-being, it was stealing time from our marriage during years when we should have been growing closer and preparing for this new chapter of life together. The moment I finally understood. The turning point came during a particularly stressful week when I was dealing with a project that felt completely meaningless. I was working late, missing dinner with Linda again, and feeling resentful about giving so much energy to something I didn't care about. That's when I remembered a conversation I'd had with an older colleague a few years earlier. He was retiring at 67 after delaying it for several years, and I asked him if he had any regrets. "I kept thinking I needed just one more year to feel financially secure," he told me. "But you know what I realized? I'll never feel financially secure enough. There's always going to be another reason to delay. The question isn't whether you have enough money, it's whether you have enough time left to enjoy what you've worked for." His words hit me differently at 63 than they had at 60. I started doing some math that was both sobering and motivating. If I lived to 85, which wasn't guaranteed, I had 22 years left. If I worked until 65 as planned, I'd be spending 2 of those precious years in a job that was making me miserable and affecting my health and marriage. Was the additional financial security worth 10% of my remaining years? When I framed it that way, the answer became clear. The decision and its aftermath. The conversation with Linda about retiring early was easier than I'd expected. She'd been watching me struggle and was relieved when I brought it up. "I've been waiting for you to realize that we have enough," she said. "Not everything we might want, but definitely enough for a good life together." We spent several weeks going through our finances carefully, and while retiring at 63 instead of 65 meant some adjustments to our plans, it was absolutely doable. More importantly, it was necessary for my well-being and our relationship. My last day at work was bittersweet. I felt some sadness about leaving colleagues and closing a chapter of my life, but mostly I felt relief. The weight I'd been carrying for those final 2 years lifted immediately. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was dramatic. Within a month, my sleep improved. Within 3 months, my blood pressure was back to normal. Within 6 months, Linda said I was myself again, more engaged, more positive, and more present in our daily life. But the most significant change was in how I felt about time itself. Instead of counting down hours until 5 p.m. or days until the weekend, I started appreciating individual moments and feeling excited about possibilities rather than burdened by obligations. What I learned about the real cost. Looking back on those extra 2 years I worked, I can see clearly what they cost me. It wasn't just the obvious things like health and happiness, though those were significant. The real cost was more subtle and more permanent. I lost 2 years of being the husband Linda deserved during a crucial transition period in our marriage. I lost 2 years of energy and curiosity that I could have directed toward discovering new interests and passions. I lost 2 years of feeling optimistic and engaged with life rather than just getting through each day. Most importantly, I lost 2 years of time, and time, unlike money, can never be recovered or replaced. This doesn't mean everyone should retire as early as possible or that staying in work past 60 is always wrong. Some people genuinely love their work and find meaning and satisfaction in it well into their later years. But for those who are hanging on primarily out of fear or inertia, it's worth asking what the delay is really costing. The questions that matter. If you're considering working past your ideal retirement age, here are the questions I wish I'd asked myself earlier. Are you staying because you love what you do, or because you're afraid to leave? There's a big difference between being energized by your work and being trapped by your fears about retirement. Is your job enhancing your life and relationships, or detracting from them? If work is consistently leaving you too drained to enjoy the rest of your life, it might be time to reconsider your priorities. What would you regret more, retiring a year too early or working a year too long? For me, the answer became clear once I thought about it honestly. How much is enough really enough? Often, the desire for more financial security is really anxiety about change in disguise. If you can live comfortably on your projected retirement income, additional years of work might not be worth the trade-offs. The gift of time. 3 years into retirement, I can say with certainty that leaving when I did was the right decision. Linda and I have traveled to places we'd dreamed about, developed deeper friendships, and found new sources of meaning and purpose. More importantly, I've rediscovered parts of myself that were getting buried under work stress and routine. I'm more patient, more curious, and more present than I was during those final working years. The extra money I would have earned by working until 65 would have been nice, but it couldn't have bought back the health, happiness, and relationship satisfaction I've gained by retiring when I did. Every person's situation is different, and there's no universal right age to retire. But what I learned is that the hidden costs of staying too long in work that no longer serves you can be far greater than the financial costs of leaving a bit earlier than planned. Time is the one resource we can't create more of, and how we choose to spend it in our later years matters more than how much money we accumulate. For me, recognizing that truth and acting on it made all the difference. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with timing retirement decisions. Are you struggling with the question of when to leave work? Have you found yourself staying in a job longer than felt right? And if so, what helped you make the decision to move on? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I learned so much from hearing about others' journeys. Thanks for watching. If this story about recognizing when it's time to leave work resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who might be facing similar decisions. Don't forget to subscribe for more honest conversations about retirement transitions. I'll see you in the next video.